today in Canterbury, a city renowned for its deep religious history. Inspiring many such as Chaucer, Canterbury Cathedral painted a magical picture of relics, saints, and the necromancy and the superstition behind them. Today we're going to be asking the question, what were the purpose of these relics? And furthermore, what was the magic and the mystery behind these sacred objects?
In 1162, Henry II decided to make Thomas Becket the Archbishop of Canterbury. Thomas was a close friend of the king, and he had served him as a general, an administrator, and as chancellor. At this time, England was a very fragmented country. Each baron was his own lord, and Henry was trying to bring this under one system. The one thing he could not control was the church. By making Thomas Archbishop, he assumed he would have access to the church's wealth, but Becket immediately resigned as chancellor and promised to protect him. Their relationship broke down, and Thomas fled the country. Years later, when Thomas returned to Canterbury, he further enraged the king when he asked the Pope to excommunicate the Archbishop of York. In a fit of rage, the king uttered the famous phrase, "Will no one rid me of this troublesome priest?" Four knights, not used to his outbursts, did exactly that. They found Thomas in the cathedral, and they gruesomely cut him down. Becket's monks took up his body and laid it on a row of red tiles in the cathedral. Fearing of the knight's return, the monks hid Thomas's body. Outrage spread across Europe. It was around this time that people started reporting miracles. Two monks, William of Canterbury and Benedict of Peterborough, kept a record of these and used it to have him canonised and made a saint. Trinity Chapel was soon built, which housed his shrine. 6 windows were built on each side, and the glaziers used images of miracles attributed to Thomas Becket. Pilgrims were allowed so close to the shrine that holes were built on either side. This allowed visitors to get their hands as close as possible to Thomas's bones. Presumably, the idea was that the closer you got to the saint, the more likely you were to be healed, and evidence would suggest that the tomb did exactly that. Images in the windows of the chapel tell tales of the miraculous effects of Thomas's relics. One of these stories is of Adam and the Forester. Adam catches 3 poachers, and one shoots an arrow through his neck. Injured, he goes home to bed. He is given a phial of the diluted blood of Thomas. These were commonly bought by people visiting the cathedral. In the next image, he is fully recovered, and he goes to Canterbury to visit the shrine of Thomas. Similar depictions show a carpenter at work with an axe. He cuts his leg, but is that night visited in a dream by Thomas Becket, who says he will be healed. The next morning, there's no sign of an injury, and he also goes to Canterbury to give thanks. Becket's reputation spread throughout the country and across Europe. The son of King Louis VII of France, who had known Thomas Becket, became ill. But Thomas appeared to him in a dream and said that he would recover. He did, and Louis took it as a miracle. He went to Canterbury and took a huge ruby with him, which was then put on the shrine. Both men and women were allowed access to the shrine, but a monetary donation was compulsory. Becket's shrine was usually covered, but if a pilgrim donated enough, then the shroud was lifted. Which raises an interesting question. Was the sole purpose of these relics religious? A political side is certainly noticeable. Becket's relics were widely circulated by bishops and monks, and the cult became one of the most important in Europe. Over 40 reliquary caskets survive to this day, many of which were made outside England. So with relics being used as political leverage, did the magical side of them deteriorate?
Was there any crossover between relics, and also were there any crossovers between relics and necromantic objects? And if so, what were the similarities between them?
Magical objects and relics have quite a lot of similarities, some more superficial than others. They would both have been thought of by medieval people as objects of power. In magic rituals, you often construct an object that has power and you create an association with a spirit. Sometimes you even draw a spirit into it. and the spirit acts to transform the physical world, to make a change in someone's fortune, their life, or in the actual the physical events or transformations. Sometimes it is the spirit acting through the object, an angel or a demon, that causes these changes, miracles or miraculous transformations. And we could see this as parallel to what the saint is doing, working through the relic. But the relationship between the saint and the relic as an object that is part of a fragment of the body of the saint, or an object that's touched the saint, is more tangible and physical than the relationship between the spirit and an object, which isn't actually thought of as being part of the spirit, but constructed of materials like metals with magical characters and words that are intended to be appropriate to the spirit cosmologically and to draw it down. Magical rituals also used arts of natural objects, so animal parts, herbs, precious stones, and even body parts of humans that were thought to have power in themselves and to contribute to the power of the operation. So in necromancy, which are rituals to summon demons, we often find the use of body parts of criminals, of hanged men, of men or women who have died violently. This is partly because necromancy originated as a ritual to summon the dead, so it has a strong connection with the other world and with contacting the spirits of another world. But another way in which magic and relics relate to one another, I suppose, is in the construction of an object of power which was worn on the body, often to protect it. And in magical texts, there would be instructions often to inscribe these with the names of God and other holy phrases, sometimes sacred images. So there is an element in which they are trying to create a holy object that will have power for personal use that is similar to a relic, although without the very sort of direct and tangible contact to the supernatural that a relic provides through being part of the body of the saint.
So in Chaucer's Pardoner's Tale, there were obviously bogus relics, and these were socially accepted due to their powers to, and I quote, multiply the beasts and store of a pilgrim's cattle. Can the use of relics to provide earthly benefit be linked to natural magic?
Yes, they can, and that's a very interesting question. When we talk about relics being socially accepted, I think the most helpful perspective on this is that in the medieval world, the sacred was normative. It was part of everyday life, and in a way, people had a yearning for contact with the supernatural, as well as supernatural help with day-to-day problems. So the link to natural magic, and actually natural magic was an accepted category for the church, because marvels in nature were part of the wondrousness of God's creation, and marvellous properties like the magnet attracting iron, the basilisk killing with its gaze, the mandrake healing eye problems, all part of the natural world. Where so in this sense, the use of animal parts has medical use that was perfectly acceptable.
So going slightly back to Chaucer, a relic will obviously lose its power as soon as someone knows that it isn't a fragment of a saint or a fragment of a body, but is in fact a pig's bone. So was there a lot of faith that had to be shown by the people using them to believe that these were sort of saintly relics and these were what people were saying?
Yes. The relics are incredibly important in medieval religious culture as a kind of point of contact between the physical and supernatural realms, and as a way of trying to contact an intermediary who may help you with terrestrial problems. But for the most part, they are fragments of bone or skin or bits of cloth. So as well as the trade in relics, there is a whole industry, I think, I would always use this quite strong term, of authenticity the most basic level through a label being attached to the fragment of bone, associating it with a saint. Saint Agatha, Saint Roche, Saint Peter. The next level of authenticity is the placing of these fragments of bone with their little label within a container that, at the most luxurious level, is shimmering gold, is an idealised head or body part or body of a saint covered in jewels. And here the rhetoric of authenticity is to link the fragment to the celestial, so that the way you access the fragment, and they did have little crystal windows through which you could see the relic, was through seeing an evocation of the celestial and having, for a medieval person, your mind drawn towards heaven. So authenticity is through label, through material culture, and through texts.
Would it be true to say then that relics have a sort of career? So in that they come into fashion and bigger reliquaries are built, they move to better cathedrals, they're linked to more miracles, and then in the movement you just suggested, the gold and the jewels no longer become appropriate, and so they fall out of fashion somewhat.
Yes, there are lots of different ways in which relics fall in and out of fashion. I think it's probably important to distinguish between relics with associations with the Holy Land and Bible stories. A fragment of the true cross or a thorn from the crown of thorns are not going to fall out of fashion in the same way. And indeed anything linked to the early church, like vials of the blood of martyrs. Local saints will fall in and out of fashion, and in fact we have some reliquaries surviving where you have the fragment of a relic with a label on it, and the label refers to a saint that we no longer know what that name refers to. So in that case the relic has completely fallen out of history as well as out of fashion, and we can see that some shrines have acquire a cult, and at Canterbury, for example, you can see the popularity of this cult of the cult of the shrine and relics of Thomas à Becket in lots of different ways. One way, for example, is the number of goldsmiths and ampullae makers, the commercial businesses that rise up around it to make pilgrim badges and ampullae to contain water diluted with blood.
So I'm here today outside of St Augustine's tomb, here in St Augustine's Abbey in Canterbury. St Augustine is regarded as the founder of the English Church, as he was the Archbishop of Canterbury in 597 AD. His tomb here and his bones were seen as a place of pilgrimage and a site of veneration. Today, people here still flock to visit his tomb.
Augustine's body was originally buried in the portico of what is now St Augustine's, Canterbury, but it was later exhumed and placed in a tomb within the Abbey Church, which became a place of pilgrimage and veneration. After the Norman conquest, the cult of St Augustine was actively promoted. Countless miracles were added to his name. St Augustine held a number of relics, including those sent by Gregory the Great in 601. These included a piece of the true cross, a piece of the seamless coat, some hair of the Blessed Virgin Mary, a portion of Aaron's rod, and various relics of apostles and martyrs. Altogether, this collection of holy relics was greatly revered.
Therefore, we can see that relics had a whole wealth of uses, adding to their mystery. From their miracles, to their magic, to their economic benefit, it is evident that relics were important in the daily lives of medieval people. Fundamental to this was faith. Without it, these objects would be but mere pieces of skin, bone, and blood. It was faith which kept these alive. So what lies behind the mystery of relics? The answer is simple: faith, and faith alone.